Good afternoon and welcome to today's Market Minute. I'm Eric Odom, Principal Real Estate Broker for Net Lease Commercial Advisory. Today we have with us Ken Evans. Ken is a friend of mine now, but 3 years ago, I guess we were just talking that's when we originally got together. Ken had come to us for office space, and it's the first time that I'd worked with somebody in Ken's business, and what Ken actually does is technology. It's a lot of technology development and product development and whatnot, and he's been in technology all over the U.S. for 30 years. My gosh, you've been from New York originally, and Atlanta, Seattle. You're in the big Seattle tech scene, and now you're in Tampa. And Ken was one of the probably the first people to bring co-working concept to the Tampa Bay area, and so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Good to be here.
Appreciate your time with us today. Again, we originally you had come to us and asked us about space, and I was unaware of some of the issues that were going on in terms of the tech and how tech would actually deal with office space. And I think probably one of the biggest issues that has gone on is maybe landlords not understanding how they would be able to adapt to a tech business, because they have very distinct needs, don't they?
They do. Any small business has distinct needs, but technology companies, because they're very volatile, but they're also very, very high growth. When they catch on, they grow in size, they scale in people and in needs. There aren't a lot of distribution requirements and warehousing requirements and manufacturing requirements in most tech companies. But there is a need to grow very, very quickly as far as staff when things do catch on. And so the traditional office space of we know how big we're going to be for the next year or two or three really doesn't apply in tech. Most often people get together and you may find a number of companies under one roof, and then one of them will spin out, which is kind of one of the benefits of co-working is people can work together in an office environment, and then when one idea catches, that company and the few founders for that company spin out and do their own thing.
So if I'm hearing you properly, essentially what happens is you have an individual, he has an idea, he's in his garage, the classic guy in the garage, Steve Jobs, that sort of thing, and then he graduates. Essentially, he or she graduates, and they need to collaborate with people, and there needs to be that next step. And then they go from that next step of maybe 2 or 3 people. They've got a small office space. In year 2, they might have 20 people working for them. In year 3, there might be 100 people working for them.
It can go that way. I mean, those are the long shots. Sometimes not everyone's going to be a Google or a Facebook or another large concern, but they do grow very, very quickly when things catch on, because the market takes over. If you don't keep up with that market demand, then someone else will step in and dominate that space. So you do have to grow very, very quickly. And what we see with tech companies, a lot of times they start very virtually. And especially today, in the last couple of years, where you don't have to have any of the infrastructure, you don't need to have a computer room. Any of that is available virtual. Any of that is available online, or as it is now, relabeled the cloud. You don't have a requirement for any of those things for tech companies anymore. All you need are the people. So a lot of times that starts with people working remotely in their garage or in their living room.
And those people aren't able to sign 3-year leases. It's just impossible.
No, and they don't need to. You don't want the fixed cost. I've done a number of workshops and done a lot of work with emerging tech companies, and the one thing you want to avoid is fixed cost up front. And a lease, an office space, is a fixed cost when you really don't need that type of environment or type of burden. What you need to be doing is plowing any capital that you have, whether you're maxing out your credit cards or you do have a little bit of seed capital from an investor. You want to be plowing all that money into the development of the product and the development of your customer.
So let's talk a little bit about co-working, because co-working, you originally introduced me to the idea, and it solves some of that issue. And talk about really what stage is co-working typically suited for in terms of the development process, the company development process.
We see it for all stages, and we were actually doing co-working before I came to you 3 years ago. We were doing co-working on an ad hoc basis in coffee shops. Where we get together and people would, it was almost like a little mini workshop or a session where people could come and discuss what challenges they had, what they were working on, how if they needed help from other people in the tech community. But co-working appeals to a broad range of people, from the individual person that's still just working on the idea, all the way to the person that's actually growing the business and adding. I don't want to say adding staff, because a lot of times, especially in this workforce environment, people don't add staff like they used to. They're not adding full-time employees. They're not adding W-2s.
1099s.
They're adding 1099s. Right. They're adding freelancers because they have project-based work. They're designing a new web product and need graphic design, or they need someone to do some web programming, or some other component of the product, but not a full-time hire. So again, avoiding the fixed cost is a key component.
Well, let's back up a little bit.
Sure.
And kind of define co-working. I mean, essentially, what is that? I mean, if you're a landlord and you're listening to this story, you're like, what is this co-working stuff? I don't get it.
Co-working is an office space where people can get together and use a desk for a day. Is probably the best way of looking at it. Co-working started out in the Bay Area. Well, it started in New York and in the Bay Area pretty much at the same time. Where
San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, so the other Bay Area,
other
absolutely.
Bay
Area. And an office like a creative agency, a marketing agency, or an ad agency had extra space, and they were working with a lot of freelancers and web developers already, so they would rent them a desk, cover the cost of that desk, and allow someone to come in, use that facility, and with the hopes of maybe that agency would use their capabilities. But they were also working side by side with other people that were working on similar projects. And so that kind of creation of critical mass, that gathering of people that are all doing similar things, even though they're doing different projects, they're doing the similar type of work, it creates kind of a creative spark for people to work together. And it's better than working alone. Sitting at home on your couch with your cat doesn't really do much for the creative process.
And it's happening now, and I've heard people say it's a more formalized Panera Bread or Starbucks.
It happens at Panera every single day all around the country, and Starbucks. But as those businesses have kind of pulled back on the number of people that are jumping in on a couch and keeping a chair for hours upon end, those people have been moved off. And Starbucks and Panera has closed off their Wi-Fi access during lunch, closed off electrical outlets. So they're really trying to push people through and get the turns. So those coffee shops are not as friendly, or at least the big chain coffee shops are not as friendly to co-working as they used to be. So people are moving into other locations where they can get together and not be hassled by a business that wants to push people through and sell more coffee, which is why co-working has cropped up in a number of different areas. It's been very, very popular in the dense urban areas like New York and San Francisco, but really it's happening all around the world.
Well, what was interesting for me, but the first time you introduced me to that, I said, well, I don't really get this very much, and then the phone started ringing. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is 2008, and we're going through a really bad period of time. And everybody was asking for the same thing. There were so many unemployed people, so many people that had been laid off, and they are trying to get back into some sort of creative some group where they're not just in their pajamas all day long, and they're trying to work. And it was advertising people, it was marketing people, it was attorneys, it was tech people. It was amazing to me, the amount of people. And so landlords in the Tampa area, they're accustomed to getting $23 a square foot on their space. And all of a sudden you have all of these displaced workers, and there's a disconnect there, I think, between the workers they're not at the same place, they're not at that ABC company anymore, they're still there. You have to figure out a way to get them into your space where it makes sense for you and for them.
Right.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit, and some of the if you're a landlord, how do you handle this situation? How do you, co-working or otherwise, how do you deal with all these 1099 workers that are...
The way that you deal with the displaced worker is if there's a migration, we're not just talking about people that are looking for jobs or people that are out of work and don't want to sit at home and would prefer to sit at Panera where they have some activity. We're talking about people that have actually made a shift in how they work and what they're doing. They've made a shift from being a W-2 worker to being a 1099 to being a freelancer in whatever discipline they have, whether it's an attorney, whether it's a web developer, graphic designer, advertising person. Once they've made that shift, and are going to hang out the shingle on their own, they need to have some type of a workspace, but they're not going to step up to a lease. They're not going to step up to the commitment as far as the personal financial commitments, the length of a normal lease. nor do they really need the space. When we were talking a while ago, you told me, don't even bother unless you're looking at 5,000 square feet and above. And that's just not practical. It's not practical in this economy. It's not practical in the Tampa Bay area anymore because we don't have that size employer, certainly not an influx of that type of employer. And it's not practical for a workforce which has shifted to at least a 50-50 mix between W-2s and 1099s, and maybe even the other way. So those people are going to want very, very flexible terms. They're also going to want very, very flexible office space. To do that, co-working is one of the things you can do. Executive suites is another option. And there's kind of a middle ground between the formal executive suites, which are still going to cost you $800 to $1,000 to $1,200 a month for a door that closes, and an office space where you actually have open areas and you're allowed to mix or encouraged to mix and collaborate with other people. And so the type of workforce that's out there is driving a new type of office adoption. So it's really not the landlords adjusting to the number of people that are out of work. It's adjusting to the new businesses that are cropping up, which are a lot of solo entrepreneurs or two-person shops doing web development or doing creative industry type things, but just don't have the requirement for the traditional lease.
It's interesting because you bring this up, and I think it's something that really should have happened and started happening in 2000 in terms of this change, because it's not just an issue of the bad economy. It goes much deeper than that. Technology has allowed people now to work from their homes, and it's allowed businesses to be able to, okay, I don't need this person in my office 24/7, 365. It's okay because that person to use that person on the outside because I can communicate with them effectively as a 1099 or out of the office or whatever it might be. So there is definitely a changing workforce, and technology has allowed that to happen with Skype, with email, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it really comes down to an issue from a landlord perspective. They're going to have to figure out how to adapt to this changing. It's not going back to the way it was in 1985.
No, absolutely not. And this has been coming for a long time. In 1994, I think it was, or a little bit before, Compaq got rid of a lot of their Salesforce offices and said, you go work from home. You're supposed to be working, you're supposed to be calling on customers. You're Salesforce. You should be outbound X number of days a week. So they got all their salespeople and said, we're going to build you home offices and expect you to be on the road. A couple years after that, IBM followed suit, and they did what was called hoteling, which is they have an office where people could come in, check in for a day, have a desk for a day, but you weren't expected to be in that office. So the size of IBM offices shrunk dramatically. We're talking about big employers. That was followed with the whole telecommuting idea, both in the commercial sector, but also the government has done a significant number of studies on and put programs in place for their employees to telecommute. They don't want people in the offices. They don't want people on the roads.
You see it in law firms here too. I mean,
absolutely.
Where associates are sharing office space. Hey, you don't need to be here every day. You guys share this office space when you need to meet with a client. And I get those requests all the time. It's really remarkable that, and you're seeing the pressure in the downtown Tampa market. Mm-hmm. Because these law firms have gone, like this, in terms of the space requirement that they actually have to have. And man, law firms used to be enormous consumers of space because all the paperwork that they have to store, and the associates and all this, and they're finding ways to economize. So it's even happening in the law firms and the more traditional types of practices. Tech's always been a little bit more on the edge, but you're seeing the more traditional types of.
But the footprint has grown, has shrunk across all industries. Tech has done that for everything from traditional service industries, law offices and accounting offices, all the way down to tech companies where they just don't have to have a lease. They don't have to have a formal office. You can start in your living room. At some point, you're going to want to work together with other people, and that's kind of where co-working and executive office suites and things that are more virtual come into play. But then beyond that, the growth is not what it used to be. Tech companies are not going to consume all that office space that they traditionally did.
We're actually sitting in a co-working space today. You want to talk about that a little bit?
We are sitting in Tampa's newest co-working space, a space started by Tampa Web Ventures, which is the acronym for that is Tampa Bay Wave. They have, I think it's up to 40 companies, small tech companies, growing tech companies, that are members of this organization. It's a peer group. It's a support group of people that are all building web ventures together. They meet on a monthly basis or a couple times a month. They do a lot of support for each other. and they decided it was share ideas, share war stories, share advice on how and how not to do certain things. And they were able to find a willing landlord that was willing to give them some space where they could take their companies to the next level. So as part of that, they're doing co-working. So it's not just the companies that may be 2 or 3 people. They are individuals, web designers, web developers, freelancers of all different types that will be using this space to come in, rent a desk for a day, sit on a couch with free Wi-Fi and some coffee, and just add to kind of the critical mass that this type of space caters to without trying to go to a Panera or something like that. And it's not just about a place to sit, it's about a place to share ideas and collaborate. And out of that collaboration, as we've seen with co-working over the last couple of years around the country, a lot of good ideas, a lot of good products, and a lot of good companies spawn from that creative critical mass.
Terrific. So essentially, just to sort of summarize, for those landlords that are out there wondering what to do with space, not every space is going to be ideally suited for co-working, but co-working definitely suits that type of creative individual that needs to collaborate, that are the more traditionally 1099 types of folks that need to come out of their home, they're working at home, and collaborate with somebody. And it could be a win-win situation for both landlords and for the individual entrepreneur. And so if I'm hearing you properly, that's kind of the summary.
Well, the market has adjusted down. It's downscaled. So really, if the market are a lot of solo entrepreneurs, whether they're tech or whether they're attorneys and CPAs, the market has shifted. The market really across the country or around the world has shifted. But certainly in Tampa, where we were heavily dependent on a service industry, heavily dependent on tourism and construction, that market has shifted significantly. So a lot of those people that work for big companies or that work for even medium-sized companies but are now solo entrepreneurs are not going to be looking for traditional office space, traditional leases, and the traditional footprint. So my advice to your clients that are out there is adjust down to the market, because that is the growth curve going forward.
Terrific. Ken, appreciate you having today and appreciate your input. Keep fighting the good fight. I know you're out there every day trying to tout the cause of the entrepreneur, and we appreciate your time today.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. You bet.